welcome to the podcast series, A Burden for the Times, a conversation on culture and race. I'm your host, Adrian Burden, and I am with my brothers, Aaron and Anton, to tackle some crucial topics in order to have some clarifying conversations about race. So, how are you guys?
Doing well.
Yeah, pretty good.
Obviously, people have looked at the cover and seen that obviously we are brothers. And even though we're brothers, all of you know that we're like a triangle. And we're so different in many ways, and our viewpoints are different. But I believe that every viewpoint has beauty and needs to be heard. This quick introductory thought as we get ready to jump into the content is my wife and I went to Dubai, and we went to the Burj Khalifa. It's one of the tallest buildings in the world. And we went to the top of the Burj Khalifa. You could see just the beautiful city of Dubai. That, is interesting is because Dubai is a beautiful city. And when you go down to the ground floor and just walk on the street, Dubai is a beautiful city. When you go to the top of the Burj Khalifa, you can see it's a beautiful city. If you go at night, you can see it's a beautiful city. But each one of those individual scenes gives you a unique perspective. And I think that this is going to be a unique perspective that we are going to hear from you guys. I think that everyone kind of thinks like I do, and obviously we know that we're all different. And so what we're going to do is talk concerning this matter about as it speaks of a burden for the times, a conversation on culture and race. So I'm going to start with you, Aaron, and we're going to do this. Aaron is the oldest of the Burden brothers, and Anton being the youngest, and I'm the middle guy. But all of us, we're all busy. We had jobs and ministries even that we're involved in. So therefore, we know our time is an invaluable resource that we have. So my question, first off, is, hey, so why do this? Give me your why, Aaron, of, you're busy and doing these things, and what kind of give us a little bit of a background, kind of an introduction to even a little bit of who you are, that gives you the why to take the time to do a podcast like this. And then when you get to the bottom of it, I want you to say, you are burdened for this specific area, a burden for the times. We have obviously a spin off our name, but we have a burden for the times, but you are burdened specifically for what? So Aaron, go ahead. You just go ahead, take that question, whatever direction you choose.
All right. So obviously, since we're brothers, we haven't been on a radio show or a radio like this since the Uncle Remus Tales. I think that was the last time.
That was the production many years ago. I remember that.
Exactly. This is round two. Uncle Remus Tales prepared us for this. But if I had to say why I think we should have this conversation, I think as a youth pastor, I've been a youth pastor here in Michigan and in Florida for a number of years. And being a youth pastor, one of the things I've been youth pastor at predominantly white churches. I don't think that's a negative or anything like that, or I don't think there's a problem with that. But I do have noticed in the past couple of months, even as me and you guys have talked, that there is a dearth of a different perspective. And sometimes there's a lot of people who believe they've already heard or they think they already have a perspective on how Black people should feel about things, do things, and it's just like, I don't know if they've actually ever sat down and had a conversation. And so I found that it's sometimes difficult to have those conversations, but I think in this instant, for a person who's been in church for a long time, all their lives in predominantly white situations, and when I do say this predominantly white, I'm not saying it's us versus them, anything like that, but I'm just saying I think that we can open our hearts and minds to a different perspective, that I think I can have this conversation with my brothers and we can talk through things, whereas some of these conversations would be hard to have with some people. So I think there needs to be, can I put it this way, an eye-opening moment for people, because I think people just assume that I think and do, like you said earlier when you opened the podcast, everybody thinks and does like me. But no, there are some people in the church who are saying hurtful things about or to Black people. And then I think they forget that I'm sitting right here and I'm a Black person. Like, I think that they need to know. And so this conversation, I think, if you were to ask me why I'm uniquely burdened for the people that I am in friendships with, in church here with, that I live, that are and once again, maybe the conservative, like Christian person that kind of has a belief that, oh, everybody should just be this way, everybody should vote this way, everybody should do this way. And I think that there has to be some conversations that, I mean, we're not all Candace Owens or we're not all whoever. Like we don't all think the same, and we have struggles that we really want to articulate. And sometimes the things that you're saying and doing aren't helpful, if that makes sense. So that would be my why for this conversation, I think.
Okay, so you're uniquely burdened then specifically for like obviously to church, your friends, close relationships that kind of already made assumptions about who you are and what you're about. Is that a way I could summarize what you're saying, basically?
Yeah, I think exactly. Yeah. For those people who think that I should be a certain way or do a certain thing, yeah, I think that sums it up.
All right, let's move on. Anton, I'm the middle guy, and I'll go last. But Anton, you haven't spoken too much yet, and I know that you have quite a bit to say. So I'm curious for you, very much so. I haven't really heard Anton's why, and so I'm interested. Anton, what's your why? Why take the time out of this time to do this? And then at the end, tell me what you are uniquely burdened for in doing this podcast as we get things started off.
All right. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Aaron brought up the fact that Aaron and Adrian, have ministries. And as soon as I knew they would bring that up, I thought my perspective is a little different just because I'm the only person in the family who had to get a real job and go out and actually do the real work. But,
thank you.
But anyway,
that's awesome.
When this first came up, actually when Adrian asked, the first thing that actually came to my mind was, I don't remember if you guys remember this, there was a meme going around. And the meme was of a young black kid hugging a police officer. I don't know if either of you remember it.
I've seen the meme you're talking about.
I've seen many like
that. And but there's one specifically that's of a young man named Devontae Hart. And I knew the story of the kid because the meme came out originally in 2018. Obviously now it's 2020. And that this kid was actually a victim of child abuse. And actually he was adopted by two Caucasian parents, lesbian couple. And they had actually abused this kid and they adopted overall 6 black children and had them engage in several very public events that made them very popular. And the story ended with the couple driving all 6 of those children off a cliff and committing suicide.
Oh, my goodness.
And I saw all these people and a pastor, and I know he did not know this and many others did not know that entire story. But I saw pastors and Christians who had, instead of seeing people, they saw political perspectives. Ooh. And at that very moment, I was like looking for a way or an outlet to speak on some of these subjects. And then when Adrian came up with this podcast, it was just a blessing. Like, it was a great opportunity to be able to vent some of that in a productive way.
Yeah.
So, wow, I didn't know that story and the stuff behind it. Obviously, Anton is very much Aaron's big time reader. Anton's definitely our thinker. I just have the big mouth of the family for the most part. But as you put all these things together, though, Anton, so what would you then summarize? You are burdened for what then? Uniquely burdened for?
I would say I'm burdened for the country and the society as a whole. I love this country, and I think just like that story, I believe that sometimes we are, instead of finding ways to come together, we are looking for reasons to be apart. And that does scare me to some degree.
Can I pause for just a second, interject? Because when Anton says, I love this country, like, see, this is the things that we can have these conversations. We can have conversations about what's going on and still love this country and love the things that are going on. And I think this is why I'm excited about this.
Gotcha. Hey, y'all can stop me at any point if you have something that you would like to add. Let me give my why to doing the podcast. I'm a preacher, and so I have it in 3 points, all right? And for those who don't know me, my name, obviously, Adrian, and I'm an international evangelist. I am committed to preaching the gospel. Our family travels on a full-time basis. Last year, 55 different pulpits all across this country and world. We spent 3 months of our calendar year in Central America and other places of the world. We are committed to the gospel and preaching the Lord Jesus Christ. And so first off, my why of doing this podcast is, number one, I know it sounds pretty cheesy to some, but God told me to do it, And so I view this like I do preaching. I view it in the sense that, when I get done preaching, obviously I want to be a blessing. I want to be a help. I want people to be challenged, but I'm not really going and then taking a little poll and saying, did you like it? And I'm not looking for Facebook comments that are giving me a thumbs up on it. It's encouraging when that does happen, but it's not really the goal. So I would say my why, number one, for doing this podcast is is just that I be Lord laid it in my heart, and we began taking the steps to do it. Now, as far as very practically, what life circumstances then brought you to then kind of talking to Aaron, then Anton about this inside of his house was basically, Aaron kind of gave a little bit of our background, but, we grew up in an environment that was predominantly white. Our church, the Christian school that we all attended, and stuff. And so for me, I can say for myself, at least, that I grew up with almost a prejudice. I remember times when Dad would say stuff like, hey, he did that to me because I was Black. And I remember thinking to myself with my spiritual maturity, oh, if Dad were spiritually mature, then he would know that's just a foolishness. That's just that's just ridiculous. That doesn't happen. I remember even thinking thoughts like that, thinking that he's, over the top and different things of it. But after, for me, things shifted really when I got into ministry and began preaching at many places across the country and even preaching with people that I used to look up to as a teenager. And I remember the first time I got uninvited from a church because they called me and let me know, hey, look, I didn't know you were Black, and we're gonna take back this meeting. I remember being told by a pastor, no, you need to head down the road. I'm sorry, this was a miscommunicate. You need to go ahead and head down the road. And then I remember for me, I can take kind of messed up things happen to me, but I remember, you obviously remember this too, Aaron. If just give context because this is important to the story. Aaron, my brother, obviously Black, and then he's married to a white lady, and her name is Aaron, actually. So it's Aaron and Aaron. But anyway, his wife. And when I remember that time, Aaron, when and when me and you are preaching a meeting together, and then I said, Aaron, send me a picture, and so that we can head over to that church because they want to do some promotional material stuff. And they saw your picture and they canceled the meeting. Now, I'm sure you remember that, right, Aaron? When that went down. Okay. And so when I remember that happened, it's like, okay, when stuff happens to me, that's not cool. But then it starts doing to people that I care about. Then it's like, okay, something broke, man. Something ain't right. And I began to think to myself, okay, so what happened inside of me is I began to start talking about it more with my mentors, with leaders, with church leadership, and just kind of saying, hey guys, do we have a problem here? I'm the only Black face in many rooms I go in, and I'm not saying I'm upset by it. It just seems that something's not right about it. And so I got a very strong and mixed response. Sometimes it was positive and sometimes it was very unpleasant when I got those responses. And so my why then made me then say, okay, with this podcast is let's clarify, because some people, I began to talk about it and some things got misunderstood. And, it's hard to put entire life inside of a Facebook post or inside of a Facebook comment. You're trying to answer carefully. And so I was like, this is something that needs a little bit more airtime, something that needs to be addressed. And so this is a difficult topic. So my why would then let's clarify these misconceptions. And the reason I like this type of setting is, this is my spot. This is our spot. You know what I mean? Like it's hard because when I'm preaching at different places, I remember talking to a friend of mine, Pastor Kenny, and he was saying, asking him, I'm like, hey, Pastor Kenny, why don't you talk about, racial things more? And he's a Black preacher. And so I said, hey, why don't you talk about these things more? And as you travel and preach, you preach in a lot of places. I don't want you to talk about this more. And then you come to the reality that, the appropriateness of the topic and when to speak upon it. It's like you've been invited to preach the 35th year anniversary, and it's not, to other church and then preach a gospel message after. This is not the time to talk about why it is racism still exists in the church. This is not the time. It's not appropriate. There are some cases, Lord lays on your heart, it has an appropriate time, appropriate ring, and you talk about it. So in this case, in this kind of setting, I like it because if somebody's listening to this right now, this is you came here, so therefore we want to share this with you if you are then saying, hey, this is important to be able to understand. And so at the end of the day, I would just simply say for me, I am burdened about the gospel. I am burdened about anything that would affect the gospel going out. If you told me that coffee affected the gospel going out, I think I would start preaching against coffee, and my wife and I would have some struggles, but I believe we would then see that I don't want there to be anything. So culture sometimes and race steps steps in the way of being able to minister to people. And I believe that a conversation needs to be had, even though many times it's not happening. So anyway, that's my why. So in summary, Aaron, you're kind of burdened for like the church in general. Anton, you are seriously burdened for our society, our country. And I see me being burdened for the gospel. So I think that we see three different views. And so let's just look and just in this first podcast, let's just clarify where we are coming from. So this time, Anton, I'm going to start with you with this question, okay? We put at the end, we talked about this, we prayed about this, how do we title this? And as we titled it, we put at the end this matter of culture and race. Now, what do we mean by this phrase? Because, as soon as we say this, people are thinking to themselves, some people may think to themselves, there's only one race, there's just a human race. You're just falling into a media narrative talking about race and things about race and pertaining to it. There may be some that feel this conversation actually is doing nothing but just stirring up a bunch of trouble. How do you take that? How do you see that, Anton, when you hear statements like that?
First, to address the we are all one race. I believe that there are statements, and you'll probably, if you listen to podcasts or me talk, I will say the word facts without context a lot. But you can make a true statement that without context, it has no meaning. If I told you all men are created equal and I made you a slave, the statement is true. The application is not. And so when you say, when you make a statement like that, I agree with you. I do. I know where they're coming from. And I also subscribe to the same concept. I just think in this country that's a fact without absolutely any context. Also, I think when you're talking about race in general and racism, I think even the way the question is phrased is probably one of my pet peeves, because we would not talk about any other sin in this way. And I think it's vitally important to address racism as a sin, because if you don't, you can't do any of the next steps that are required. And when I do that, I had 2 points, and I didn't try to be a preacher either. But once we accept racism as a sin, you have to do two things. First, you have to understand it can't be erased, because no other sin is going away. No one believes theft is going away. No one thinks murder is going away. Once you address it as a sin, you understand that this is a permanent blot that we have to work towards getting rid of or minimizing every day. Secondly, you understand that it becomes our job as Christians and as Americans to prevent it. There should be classes taught against it. There should be things taught against it like there are against every other sin. The only other thing I was going to say is just culture, because I think culture is also a very important word. If we define culture, it's defined in Webster's as the customs, arts, social institutions, and achievement of a particular people or other social group. And I think when having a discussion about racism and culture, we have to understand that cultures were not ordained of God. Art is not ordained of God. Your culture, as it differs from person to person, has nothing to do with your relationship with Christ.
That was some deep stuff. When you tag it as sin, like you're getting like the preacher mode on me, man. That's good stuff, man.
You can come and get a not real job with us. You seem like you got it. No.
All right, Aaron, I swing it to you then.
Oh man. So why, when we start talking about culture and race, I think even as you were saying, like, what if someone says there's no race, it's all made up, or whatever the things are, what is sin, not skin, or whatever the phrase would be. I think I would have to say I think all of us would come to a point where we realized in our environment that we were growing up in, we were different than everybody else. So you can say whatever you want about, like, there's no difference. We found out really quickly there is a
and it came down to getting married. It came down to be a difference.
Exactly. There's thing. But then when it comes down to different issues, all of a sudden, so I guess we'll just talk right, because of course we're brothers, so we've had conversations like this before. But growing up, I remember, you guys know, because the church we grew up in moved buildings. So I remember being in the old building in Moorhead, and we're sitting around the lunchroom table. We're having this conversation about marrying, and I remember one of the girls said, "Oh man, Aaron, I couldn't marry you because you're black." And I was like, okay, so whatever, and you move on. But then I remember asking the question, because the conversation was light and we were laughing about it. But it was like, so you're telling me if I was the most spiritual man on earth, the blah, blah, fill up all these adjectives, you wouldn't marry me. And they said, no, my dad would kill us if we were to marry me. And I remember as a kid, even being young, remembering like, whoa, there's nothing I can do to be good enough to run with these guys. Like, I am different. So we can say like, oh, well, there's not really a difference. When it comes down to the everyday rubber meets the road, there was a difference in their mind, even though they would have said on paper there isn't. And so that's why when we start talking about culture and race, we can say all day that this is a media made up thing. But when it comes down to it, I've worked in the church long enough. I've been around situations long enough to know there is a difference. And we may think it's not politically correct to talk about it or whatever, but in people's minds, there is a difference in the different cultures and groups of people.
Yeah, I think anybody being intellectually honest have to come to that conclusion eventually to say that there is something to be said about the differences, or why on earth would, like, our lives, you think about it, our lives would be entirely different if all of us grew up in the same church and we were all white. It'd be entirely different. It's not even, we wouldn't be recognizable in some regards, and I'm not saying that I bemoan where we are currently in different things.
Right.
It's kind of intellectually dishonest to say that there's absolutely no difference in stuff. But anyway.
Right.
Yeah, and I want to take that question too, because in talking about race, because I want to take, in my angle, just a biblical look about even where this began to come from. I mean, could there be a better word used possibly in different things of what this is about? But I do believe that you go back to the Tower of Babel. When you go back to the Tower of Babel, what did you find? That mankind was all one. And what did God even look down and says, wow, they're all of one mind. They'll be able to accomplish anything when they're unified of one mind. And so when you watched man, what's the first thing they did? They wanted to be bigger than the one who they felt was bigger than them, which was God. So they start building this tower. This spirit of superiority has been inside of man since the beginning of time. And so what happened, though, is God said, okay, you really think you're bigger than me? All right. Then he does one thing, confounds their languages, and then they leave. But here's what happens at the Tower of Babel, even though God changed their languages, their spirit of superiority never changed. They still want to be better than somebody else. So they now, instead of trying to be better than God, which I know people groups do that, they want to be better than each other. So they begin now looking at each other and be like, who's going to be the greatest? What is all these people through history? I want to be better than you. I want to be better than you, greater than you. And so how on earth do we think the spirit of superiority then has now changed within people? Anton addressed it just a little bit earlier about it's being a sin problem. If we don't address it as this, is because inside of us, if we just say, well, I just don't struggle with racism, I just don't struggle with it at all. It's like, okay, you're not human. You know what I'm saying? Inside of us, we have this desire to be greater or even be better. And then I think sometimes when we look at specifically, obviously black versus white in this context here that we're looking at here, it's like every one of us have a value system that we place on. I remember going to a conference and asking a group of people, which is better, a black man or a white man? And it's kind of like, don't ask that. That makes us very uncomfortable and different things like that. But you're going to start thinking in your mind, if you think to yourself, which one's better, you're going to think to yourself, okay, which things do I value more? Do I value like economics, hard work? Do I value certain things? And then that's going to make us then say, this is better than another. This is a socially constructed thing as far as with race. But just because it's socially constructed does not mean that it does not exist. And as we look in society to what we value. And then after we look to what we value, we start attributing more value to certain groups of people. Hence, we look at races that are some better than other. What was Hitler? Trying to get a pure race of people to be able to be there. So I would say that the spirit of superiority, is always there. I think that's why it's important for us to talk about race and culture. And then again, culture, in my opinion, too, as well, was the obstacle that Peter had to jump through to be able to minister to the Gentiles. Think of it. I mean, he was over there, preached Pentecost. Then God comes down, drops that little sheet in front of him and says, hey, eat of it. He says, no, I can't eat of that. I can't be eating all that stuff. And then God had to do it 3 times to then make him then eventually go to Cornelius. And then even after he preaches the gospel to the Gentiles, after that point, you find that Paul's over here and he's sitting over at the table with the Gentiles. Gentiles eating pork chops and ham. And he's like, man, this is great. Peter's over here saying, what are you doing? And Peter would have said, this is a cultural thing. This is cultural thing. But this cultural thing made it that he did not minister effectively to the Gentiles. Hence, Paul had to go to him and say, man, what are you doing, you hypocrite? Man, withstand him to the face. So cultural things can affect the propagation of the gospel. Hence, I think this is important for us to talk about it, because again, under the why and under why we named it what we named it, race, this matter about race and culture, these things do matter. So let me just switch back though. I got one more question, you guys. And this time, Aaron, I want you to start things off because culture and race, but we want to have at the beginning of it, we said clarifying conversations, okay? Clarifying conversations about culture and race. So let's relook at that word conversations. It seems like there's a lot of conversations happening. Actually I look on Twitter and stuff. I see, uncomfortable conversation with a black man. Is that the one it's called with Emmanuel? I think there's other conversations that are happening. And so it seems that after George Floyd, people starting to be talking. So do you feel that these are powerful conversations that are happening right now? And if not, in what is lacking? And if you do feel these conversations are profitable that are happening, then why on earth would you kind of start jumping in on a podcast and kind of just starting to spearhead this series of conversations about it if you think the need's already been met? So basically, are conversations happening in your opinion?
I think there are some conversations that are happening in a lot of areas, just like you said, uncomfortable conversations. And I would even say in my own life, not that I'm having a personal conversation with myself, but I'd say in my own life, 2020 has been the moment where I've turned up the Black voices in my life and kind of turned down some of this sounds racist, I guess, right? But I've turned down some white voices because I wanted to hear these conversations. I want to hear the conversations that are happening. And so when we start looking at it, there are some profitable conversations, but I'm going to be honest. In the circles I run, in the places I live, the people I'm having conversations with, very few of them are happening because I think we have, once again, man, everybody has their perspective and that's all they see. I mean, we see that with the elections. We see that with COVID-19. We see all these things happening, right? That everybody has their little narrative that they're going to run with and they stop listening. And so, like you said earlier, that if you came to this conversation, you came to us. Like, this is what we were talking about. Like, this is it right here. That we're trying to have it. And I think these conversations need to be had. And I think, because see, people that I know and love will probably listen to this, right? Because this is just what people do. But some of these people are the ones that need to hear this conversation. And I don't know who they'd hear it. I could tell them to go listen to Emmanuel Acho and they wouldn't hear it. I could go tell them to go read MLK's letters from a Birmingham jail. They're not going to read it, but they'll be more inclined to listen to somebody on Fox News or whatever. And I'm not knocking Fox News, but we have our little listen to that. These little people, let's go ahead and be honest, right? The Black people that say what white people want to hear.
yeah, that's the truth.
They're going to go listen to those folks. And so I'm willing to stand up at this point and kind of say, you know what? I don't feel that way. That's not a biblical way of thinking, and that's not the way it is. So I think there are conversations happening. I'm just afraid that some of the people aren't listening to those conversations and willing to sit down and have those conversations. Some of them I have. Like, I've had great friends. I've had pastors call me in this area. I've had camp directors call me and have conversations, but I've also had people that I know and love who won't even entertain the conversation and just believe that I'm, like you said earlier, kind of just pushing an agenda. And I don't think that's happening. So I think the conversations are happening some places. They need to happen more. And I'm hoping this conversation is helpful, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I firmly agree. Me and Aaron would have similar backgrounds as far as, him being a youth pastor over there and me being in ministry and stuff. And man, I almost pretty much stole my thunder of what my answer would be. So Anton, in your perspective, how do you see it? Do you think the conversations are happening in your world, or how do you view it?
I think conversations are happening. I agree with Aaron in that aspect. And I think we probably would agree on most things. The only thing I would say is I think conversations are being had and are loudest in places where they are more concerning. I think conversations, which it's the same thing, you can go back to lots of movements in the past. I think sometimes conversations get co-opted, and that does concern me, is because I think the people who are currently leading the conversation are taking it in places where it shouldn't go.
Right.
And that's why it's so important that as Christians, we were leading this conversation instead of falling back.
Yeah.
Because, oh, go ahead.
No, all I wanted to add is your point is perfect, because I remember you helping me through, like, even when George Floyd was murdered there, I remember having strong feelings, and you told me, and me and you had a conversation, and you kind of helped me understand, like, oh man, maybe this isn't the conversation you should be having in this certain area. This is the conversation you had. And I like what you're saying, because I think even in my own mind, you've helped me there. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I add an exclamation point behind that too, because I remember that conversation that you and Aaron are talking about, and actually it made me think too of not jump on one bandwagon, but to be able to think more clearly and clarifyingly about these things. But anyway, go ahead, Anton. But yeah, good point.
Because for me, especially like if you're talking about conversations on police brutality or conversations on mass incarceration, I do think in reality, I'm not going to say that I'm for either party. Democrats are having more eventful and useful conversations on that subject. And although obviously evangelicals by and large are Republican, that even the evangelicals who I think Phil Vischer is doing a good job. He has several YouTube videos, a white evangelical. The ones who are coming out to try to push for these things are being ostracized. I mean, in reality, they're almost being pushed out of a movement that honestly, they're the ones who need to be followed. And that's why these conversations concern me, because they're happening. But all the great voices that people could follow into, I don't want to say a better tomorrow, but into a future that is more inclusive and includes more Black people in the evangelical movement, are being pushed to the back. And the voices that are being heard the most are the people who are shouting down more than they're actually giving actual instruction. So that's my only concern with the conversations.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I look at it because you're just mentioning about how if a person does in those communities as a white person begin to speak on it, I almost feel for them. Like I look at them on Facebook and they make a stand about something, or and even I would say in a balanced, very balanced way of looking at it. And it's almost like, they get roasted alive, and so
warrior. Exactly.
Yeah. And Aaron, I think you were mentioning about that one time that senator had said something that
Tim Scott.
Tim Scott. Yeah. Because I mean, to say it, go ahead, tell that story real quick. Because actually, for me, I thought it kind of went along with it.
I mean, I just remember going on Twitter, and it's Tim Scott. He's a Republican, and he's been pro-Trump. He's even stood behind Trump on some things that I thought, like, what? That's kind of bad. But as soon as he tweeted that he did not agree with the Breonna Taylor ruling, I mean, you read the comments under Twitter, like, for the people who hate cancel culture, I'm saying they're leading the pack.
It's almost like there's this invisible narrative that must be followed. And as soon as it's violated, buddy, you are done. You have crossed over into the side. So anyway, it's by conversations. Did you have anything you want to add before I give my 2 cents about conversations?
Oh, go for it.
Yeah, I would say, for me, conversations obviously is the exchanging of ideas, so that means I don't think that we should people that have conversations sometimes sit down and they want to just have a conversation to walk away and say, we had a conversation, like I have made it my life goal. I think I heard this on another podcast, I think Matt's podcast or something, about he interviewed a guy and he was like, and he said that he has made it his life's goal that he will never be the token Black friend for somebody, for them to be able to use him to be able to walk to people and say ridiculous things and says, well, it's okay because I have a Black friend and it's Adrian. Like, I refuse to be that guy, right? And since I refuse to be the person that's just kind of like, you use me as a token to have a conversation with, so then you can go and say how sensitive you are to everybody else in the world because you talk to a Black man. Like, there's one thing to have a conversation for the sake of having a conversation, but it's the exchanging of the ideas. So how many exchanged conversation ideas that are happening? I would say in my world, that's largely obviously evangelical world. It's not as popular. So here's what I mean then a conversation. So like, what if two people are sitting down inside of a car? No, not in a car. Let's just say we go out to a restaurant and the person, silly illustration, but sits down across from they've never met. And the person believes that the other person's from Colorado. So this guy believes the other guy is from Colorado. And the guy sits down, they're having a conversation, they're talking. And the one guy who, is just saying, so where are you from? The guy says, I'm from Florida. And then the guy in his head is like, no, he's from Colorado. Oh, really? You don't like Colorado? And the guy's like, no, I'm actually from Florida. And then the guy keeps going on and trying to convince the man who is from Florida that actually, he probably is from Colorado. And if he doesn't believe he's in Colorado, it's kind of weird. It sounds silly, but sometimes conversations happen like that. We're almost in a way, it's like, did you invite me to have a conversation so you can be able to understand, or you invite me to have a conversation so you can correct me, so you can just fix me and tell me how ridiculous my thoughts process is, how ridiculous it is that I really shouldn't be from Florida. Colorado is really where, you really are this, to me, that's not a conversation. Now, I would say in my very conservative world, not in a lot, but in a very conservative world, that's more the conversations that are happening. And so after then, they use that as a platform to be able to say, hey, look, this is why we are doing this. I mean, this is what we are doing. We're having these conversations. Look how awesome we are. And then really there's nothing been learned and there's nothing been changed. You see, if you can go through your last 5-10 years of your life and you've changed nothing in your life, I see that as a problem. Are we not learning more every day? Are we not walking closer with God every day? He's showing us things. So hence, if we say that we haven't changed in 5 or 10 years, that means somebody who's pastored a church at 30 and now he's 40 and never changed a thing. Well, then God didn't teach you anything in 10 years, my friend. Something's up, in my opinion. So I would say conversations, I don't believe are necessarily happening. Hence, I believe that's why it's important to be able to have a twofold back and forth conversation. Do you have follow up on that? Because I hope that made sense. I was trying to get those thoughts out.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Hey, well, to wrap things up, let's do this. At the end of each episode, we want to make sure that we leave hope. We make sure that people understand that there are some practical action steps that can happen in this entire realm of making sure that we're caring about our brother and our neighbor. And in this area, what we call this ending segment is tips and tools for our day. So what we like to do is recommend a resource, some type of action step to aid in your journey of having profitable and clarifying conversations with others. So we'll start with the oldest. Aaron, what's your tip, man, to close things up? Tip or tool for the day?
All right, I'm going to go for my tool. It's going to be a podcast. I know that you're already listening to this one and that you thoroughly enjoyed it. But as we go through it, my podcast is going to be 1619. It's a New York Times podcast. My wife had recommended it to me and we listened to it together. I would say, I'm going to go ahead and put the preface out there that episode 3, The Birth of American Music, I didn't care for that episode. I think it was probably one of the unnecessary in there. So if you're going to listen to it, it's only 6 episodes. And if you skip 3, I think you would not, you'd be valuing your time. But as far as the episode itself, it just talks about some of the issues of history. So a lot of times people are, especially nowadays, saying, well, why don't we forgive something that happened hundreds of years ago? Or in the world is, well, 1619 kind of walks through, of course, coming across on the slave ships, but it leads all the way into one of the courts systems, like I'm trying to think of the right word, but a ruling that they're still working on right now about some black farmers who have been discriminated against and have not been allowed to get loans and things like that. And so when he's talking about systemic racism, they kind of walk through all through the history of Black America and kind of spell some things out. And I think it was a helpful podcast. I think it was there was nothing in it that I would really, except for that episode 3, there was some cursing and unnecessary stuff in episode 3 that I didn't think needed to be handled. So I'd say skip that episode. But other than that, I think it was a very helpful podcast. So if you're a podcast listener, 1619, 6 episodes, skip the 5. And I think it'll give you some background to some things. They talk about some hard things. I'm going to say it's discouraging at times, but I think it's conversations that open up to conversations like these we're having right now. So that's my tip, 1619.
That sounds good. In fact, I like conversations that are tough. I have found that I don't really appreciate just fluffy conversation all the time. I mean, because it doesn't seem to have some genuineness to it. If it doesn't have, because sometimes in any relationship, you're going to have to talk about some hard things to be able to have that deep relationship. So I think it's good. I've never even heard of that. So I give it a shot. And Anton, right before you do yours, let me do mine. Go in birth order here. And I'm going to mine is actually going to be a book. It's probably a book that if you have at all done any research into the matter of race and culture and different things. And so it seems like almost, in my opinion, it's always my go-to. It used to be Divided by Faith, but I would say my always go-to book of saying, you really are serious about this? You seriously want to talk about these things? You seriously want to have a conversation? In fact, there are many people who I was like, hey, look, I'll buy the book for you, right? And so Jemar Tisby's book on the color of compromise, I think it's a great historical perspective. I think he does his homework, does it well, and I think it's a balanced view of being able to see things. Kind of, some people want a big red button to push, fix this, tell me what to fix, Adrian, and then press the button, when there's so much more than just pressing one big button and now all these things are gone. It is a process of learning and hearing and listening and understanding. I believe that book, man, in a big way does some amazing things. So I would recommend Jemar Tisby, Color of Compromise. Anton, tip or tool, what you got?
I got a tip, actually, and this is one that's kind of personal for me. Actually, when all this stuff happened, we were talking about George Floyd, a lot of events, I was having a real hard time dealing with both, if you want to say the Trump response or the Republican response, and a lot of other things. And something that really, really helped me was to sit down every night and think of the person that I either disagreed with or thought the least about their political affiliations, and to just pray for them like I was the only thing standing between them and hell. And it helped me so much.
Wow.
Because you stop seeing political positions and start seeing people for what they are, souls Jesus died for. And I think if you do that, and I would just encourage anyone listening, just do that for a month and see if your social media changes.
That's convicting. Want to have an altar call now?
You are just as I am.
I think that one wins today. But I agree wholeheartedly, because that's sometimes for me. It's easy to be able to take people and just subject them to the thing you dislike about them the most, and that's all they are to you. And so praying for a person, wow, that does a whole lot. So I think these are great tips and tools. Anything else you want to follow up, guys, before I go ahead, give these closing remarks?
I don't know. I'm going to follow up but I'm going to go write Candace Owens down real quick. And then
I'm going to write down. Oh, I can't say that. Okay. That is funny.
I think it was an awesome tip.
Well, all right. Well, we certainly hope you enjoy the podcast, enjoy the discussion. This is a podcast series, and this series we want to kind of go through these things. It doesn't mean this is going to be a perpetual podcast that comes on and on and on for all time, but it is a podcast for this season of time inside of our life and in our country, and just some thoughts about what's coming up down the pike as far as podcast titles and episodes. We want to talk about cultural Christianity. We want to talk about racism as it relates to the Bible, cognitive dissonance. That should be a good one. Evangelicalism and its view of slavery throughout the years. Also want to talk about, this ought to be an interesting one, and I have a hard time. I want to preface it by saying different things, but you'll just have to listen. We're going to talk about white privilege. What does that mean? Is that many times that rubs people the wrong way? What's the understanding behind those things? And so as we go and talk about all these topics, we hope that you come prayerfully, come with an open mind and open heart. It is our desire to have these conversations to be clarifying and also to be profitable as well. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, and all the above, email us at burdenforthetimes@gmail.com. All right. A burdenforthetimes@gmail.com. Send all those questions there. Aaron will be happy to answer all of them, and we will make sure to go from there. But anyway, we certainly appreciate you joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you, not seeing you, but hope you join us next time on A Burden for the Times.